What's up, Cox? You know what I'm saying? We're going to talk about a few things in this video. The primary thing I want to talk about is this idea, right? Like, this is an idea that I think I'm the first one to talk about it. I mean, if I do say so myself, I think I'm the first one to talk about a lot of things. You know what I'm saying? But this one for sure, I haven't heard anyone talk about this. And it's this idea, right, motherfucks, that wrestlers benefit from all these different companies being around, you know? And I'm going to argue the exact opposite of that. Like, I think that the more wrestling companies that there are, the less, like, wrestlers benefit from this. Like, and if anything, they suffer from this substantially, right? The reason I say this comes as a result of a few wrestlers coming back to a TNA or Impact Wrestling at Slammiversary, which I didn't watch, but I heard it was good, you know? And it sounded like a real wrestling show, so I might give that one a shot if I can. I don't know where I'd watch it, but I'd figure it out, you know? So, there you go, motherfucks. We had people like Eric Young, who I like, everybody knows that, EC3, Gallows and Anderson, etc., coming back, right? And also, one of my friends was telling me how apparently on the Gallows and Anderson podcast or whatever, they were talking about how if they hadn't signed with WWE, they would have been in the inner circle. I guess they would have had the spot of like Santana and Ortiz. You know, they would have been in the inner circle. I don't know why they can't just do that now, but it is what it is, right? Or they would have gone to New Japan, and Anderson was going to beat Dean Ambrose for the U.S. title, right? And they regret signing with WWE, even though they admit they made a lot more money with WWE. And my friend was saying how, like, wow, they really missed out. And I'm like, dude, don't be a fucking mark. You know, it's all about the money. Like Scott Steiner said, if you're in this business for anything other than the money, you're a fucking mark. You know, if you really care about being champion more than you care about money, you're a mark. You know what I'm saying? Randy Orton is one of the higher paid guys in the company. And right now he's having, like, probably the best run of his career since his, like, 2009 run, right? But let's be real, right? It doesn't matter if he's feuding with, I don't know, Kalisto for the U.S. title, right? If he's getting fat paid, that's all that matters. I don't give a shit if, like, the champion was Jinder Mahal, who wasn't making that big money because he was Jinder Mahal, you know? Like, it doesn't matter if you're champion or not. It doesn't matter how you're booked. It's not a real sport. You know, this idea that somehow it would be better for Carl Anderson to go be the U.S. champion in New Japan, somehow that's, like, more prestigious or better in any way than being a tag team jobber on Raw is ridiculous. It's all about how much money you're making. It's a job, motherfucks. It's a job. You know, the person who is like the head of the circus at the town fair gets like nothing. He gets like a pizza. Like, that's his payment. He eats a pizza, right? If you're like the opening act at Cirque du Soleil, you know, you're getting fat paid. And that's your goal. Your goal isn't like, I want to be the head. I want people to cheer for me more than they cheer for the other guys. That's like a petty mentality. That's like the mentality of like a retarded person. You know what I'm saying? That's a mentality that works in real sports. Because in real sports, the best person is going to be rewarded oftentimes with the most cheers. In almost all sports, except for maybe American football, right? Where the best player could be like the nose guard, you know, or like the center or something, and nobody gives a fuck. They only care about the quarterback. So that's what I'm saying, right? But by having all these different companies, you know, the argument is that these people have somewhere to go to. And I get that part. I get the fact that, like, someone like Eric Young is not unemployed. You know, that's good. You know, like, I appreciate that. I don't want Eric Young to be unemployed. Yeah? But with that comes the negative of it, right? People don't have to work as hard. You know, when there's like 200 jobs available for you, you know, if you're a wrestler, you have to work extremely hard to be a top 200 guy in wrestling in order to get a job with WWE or whatever it is, like, let's say 100 people, right? You have to work really hard. And when I say work really hard, I don't just mean hit the gym, you know, and do all these other things. I'm talking more about, like, work hard on your character, work hard on reinventing yourself, work hard on being charismatic, work hard on getting over by virtue of who you are and what you can do, not by virtue of who you were. You know what I'm saying? And that happens a lot. In wrestling, that happens a lot, motherfucks. So you have someone like Dean Ambrose, right? Dean Ambrose was a jobber for like 1,000 years in the Indies, right? I saw him on a DVD once. It was San Francisco Homicide. He beat Homicide, and it was presented as if it was a big deal. And I'm like, dude, in TNA, Homicide is like a jobber, you know? So it is what it is, right? He beat Homicide. All of a sudden, he gets signed, you know, to NXT, and he debuts there. He has like a decent run in WWE. He becomes champion, right? Boom, that's it. He's a champion in WWE. He became a world champion. He became WWE champion, right? Then Stone Cold buries him completely, so he gets all butthurt because he's actually a pussy. You know what I'm saying? Apparently, right? I mean, I don't think he's a pussy because he did those death matches, but you know, he's a sensitive boy. He's a sensitive little boy, right? So he gets all pissed off, starts screwing up, gets injured, doesn't follow directions, and all of a sudden, he's out of there, motherfuckers. He's out of there. But now, he takes that WWE clout that he has worked hard to get. I'm not going to sit here and say it was all handed to him, right? He worked hard, you know. He was entertaining with his Shield and everything else. So he worked hard, he got a name for himself, and now he can leverage, motherfuckers, that name in New Japan and AEW, where he is the U.S. champion in New Japan, and he is the AEW world champion in AEW. Now, imagine if Dean Ambrose didn't have the name of Dean Ambrose, right? Imagine if he was a new guy. People wouldn't cheer for him because they'd be like, who's this fucking loser and how is he any different from Darby Allin, right? Nobody would inherently like him. They like him because he was in WWE. So in other words, while for the man who plays Dean Ambrose, the fact that he spent time in WWE is a good thing, right? It puts him over, it elevates him, it makes him more interesting to the fans. For the fans, it's not a good thing because Dean Ambrose has absolutely zero incentive to improve at all, right? He can just continue being Jon Moxley, which is the same thing as Dean Ambrose, keep doing the same moves, saying the same shit, and all of a sudden, he's a main eventer. He went to a smaller pond, and by virtue of the pond being smaller, the same fish appears bigger. That's all that's happened, motherfuckers. That's all that's happened. And he's not the only one. But imagine now, for example, imagine taking, I don't know, the example that I like to use. There's two examples that I'll use. Elijah Burke, right? Elijah Burke, even though he was a WWE guy, he was in ECW. He never made it to SmackDown or Raw, and he never was good on ECW either. So he was pretty much released immediately. Like, he never had the opportunity to solidify himself as a WWE guy. But that's just enough for the hardcore fans to kind of know who he is, right? So when they introduced the Pope D'Angelo Dinero, you see it, you're like, oh, it's an ECW guy. This is probably going to fail just like it did in ECW. But then Elijah Burke invests in the character, and the people, whoever was in charge of creative, they invest in the character and they create a character, right? Called the Pope D'Angelo Dinero, right? And now all of a sudden, you see the talents of the guy in ECW. You actually see what he was capable of. He was great at promos. He was charismatic. When he was able to choose his wardrobe, he looked awesome. You know what I'm saying? He looked like a cool dude, right? So you see now, you're like, oh, wow, he really was held down. You know, the gimmick they gave him in WWE where he was a corner man really held him down, right? The same can be said about Bubba Ray Dudley, you know? Bubba Ray Dudley and the Dudley Boys, they were held down by the gimmick of being a tag team, right? Then they shifted their gimmick into Aces and Eights, right, which is a different gimmick altogether. And more importantly, Bubba Ray became Bully Ray, right? He became a different character completely, you know? And he stuck with that Bully Ray character. That's the more interesting character for him. Do you see what I'm saying, motherfuckers? Do you see what I'm saying? That's a real reinvention. And the reason why Bubba Ray did that, right, is because he had to. Because he had been in a tag team his entire career, and now it's like, all right, well, you need to stand out as a singles guy, right? You must now pull a JBL, right? Same thing with JBL. He did it in the same company, but same idea. It's like, dude, you've been JBL. I like to drink beer, you know? I'm that guy for your entire career, basically, right? And now we're separating you from Farouk, from Ron Simmons. So now you gotta fucking do something and stand out. So he's like, all right, I'm gonna change my character. That's the benefit that we get, right, from having fewer companies that are available to wrestlers. Imagine if JBL decided to say, no, I'm not going to invent the JBL character. I'm going to stick to being Bradshaw. He would flop around in the hardcore division, if they even had that since then, right? And he'd lose to Steve Blackman a couple of times, I'm sure, Hardcore Holly. And then he'd go to AEW if AEW was around, and they'd be like, oh, here comes Brad Johnson, you know, Brad Johnson. Oh, what's Brad Johnson doing in AEW? And he would have the same exact character as Bradshaw did before he became JBL, and he would be pushed to the moon because he's a WWE guy, right? You understand what I'm saying? Same thing with Dean Ambrose. It's like, well, why should Dean Ambrose have to innovate? Why? He can just go there and be like, yo, I'm Dean Ambrose. Like, okay, good enough. Go in there. Go wrestle Joey Janela, another jobber, you know? So that's what I'm saying. When people are forced to reinvent themselves, a lot of times good things happen. A perfect example is EC3 in his first transition, right? He went from goofball idiot Derek Bateman, right? They gave him an actual character. They gave him a push. They gave him some support. They're like, you are now EC3 here. You're a big deal here now, motherfucker. You were going to push you to the main event. And eventually he worked his way up to the main event, became a main eventer, became TNA champion. Then he leveraged that. He did the wrong thing. He leveraged that. He went to WWE where he was just EC3. He just took the same gimmick. You know, the gimmick only works in TNA where the name Carter has a relevance. If you're just like a guy who thinks he's better than you, if you're basically MJF, you know, in your WWE, there's no room for that in WWE. WWE, you actually have to be good. You know, you can't skate around with a shitty gimmick, right? So if EC3 had gone to WWE, because he is good, he's in great shape, he's got a good look to him, right? If he went there and he reinvented himself, he would have had a real shot. You know, he would have had a legitimate shot. And when I say reinvent yourself, I don't mean change everything. You can even, like, I might even consider Drew McIntyre and Jinder Mahal to be reinventions as well, you know? They hit the gym, they worked hard, they're back, they're aggressive, they're older and manlier, you know? They've changed, they've put in the work, motherfucks. And I don't want to hear of people, oh, Jinder Mahal isn't good. Jinder Mahal is fucking good. Fuck you if you think otherwise. What do you think of that? So, there you go, you know? EC3 now, on the other hand, is back in TNA, right? He's going to be back there. And he's back there. The promo that he cut is just him taking off his hood, looking at the camera, and throwing a glass at the wall where there's like a 3 behind him. Oh, EC3 is back, everyone. Watch out. You know, he's not impressive enough now to come back and be like, I'm back, motherfucks. No, you're a jobber now. You've been embarrassed already. You know, it doesn't matter. Now you have to reinvent yourself again. Otherwise, it's going to be a flop. I don't give a shit about EC3 and TNA. You know, it's the same exact thing with the Good Brothers. Gallows and Anderson are in TNA now. Who the fuck cares? Who the fuck gives a shit? They're the same 2 guys. Why should I care about them now when I didn't care about them last week when they were in WWE getting jobbed out? You know what? It's them and Eddie Edwards now. They're the new club. Great. Who gives a flying fuck? You know what I'm saying? I don't give a rat's ass about that. So that's what I'm getting at, motherfucks. These 2 guys need to reinvent themselves. You need to change. And it is impossible to reinvent yourself and to change when you can just take that shitty act that got you no traction in WWE and take it to an inferior company and be like, I'm here now. I don't need to reinvent myself. I'm Gallows and Anderson. And they're like, oh, yeah, you don't. You're Gallows and Anderson. Go ahead. You know, this is the same problem that happens with wrestlers that come from overseas. Whether it be Sin Cara or Nakamura, right? You have to reinvent yourself. The same shit that got you over in New Japan, you can't just translate that here and be like, oh, Nakamura's great. You can for a while. The neckbeards will like that. Oh, my anime dreams are coming true. You know what I'm saying? But beyond that, then what? You know what I'm saying? Then what? The people are going to be like, all right, this guy has 3 moves. I don't care how long you have to lie to yourselves. The facts speak for themselves. Eventually, you realize that Nakamura has 3 moves, and then he's not entertaining. You know? Like, the fans can start chanting, oh, all that shit during his entrance all they want. But eventually, the shit will hit the ceiling. You know what I'm saying? The shit will hit the fan, I should say. You know? It'll be over before you know it. And that's the problem, motherfucks. The problem is that these people refuse to reinvent themselves because they don't have to. And the reason that they don't have to is because there are too many alternatives out there, right? Take any WWE jobber. Perfect example, Heath Slater. Heath Slater has somehow been employed by WWE for like 10 to 15 years, despite having virtually no gimmick and offering virtually nothing, right? He has offered nothing to this company. The only thing he's done is I got kids. That was the only thing that was mildly entertaining about him. Now, you take that shit and you ask yourself, is this going to get over anywhere? The answer is no, it's not. Does he need to reinvent himself? The answer is a clear and resounding yes. Will he reinvent himself? Absolutely not. Why should he? Why should he, motherfucks? When just being Heath Slater gives him enough traction to go work in New Japan and become a star. That's all he needs. Just go to New Japan and be like, hey, I work at WWE. Everyone here that you have is shit. And none of them would make it 10 years in WWE. They'd all get fired in 3 years. So hire me. They'd be like, okay, yeah, we will hire you. Just the same way they hired Juice Robinson. The same way they hired everyone that fails in WWE, goes to AEW or New Japan. That's the problem, motherfucks. But because they have these alternatives, they don't need to actually work hard and become good wrestlers. They have no incentive to do so. You know, that's why the good wrestlers that you see are going to come from other places. Like when WWE signs, I don't know, someone who doesn't have a gimmick. Let's say, I don't know, let's just say they sign Brian Cage. If Brian Cage comes in there, even Brian Cage, who has a gimmick just based on his look, even he needs a gimmick. He needs to reinvent himself. He needs to be like, maybe he needs to be like a super violent heel, or maybe like a really nice guy face or something, you know? He can't be this loser that hangs out with Taz. That doesn't fucking work anymore. You know, people need characters, and characters are what make a wrestler good. Eddie Guerrero wasn't good because he could do the suplex well. You fucking retards. That's the problem. People are like, oh, Eddie Guerrero, what a legend. Oh, he could do the Three Amigos really well. Nobody gives a fuck about that. The Three Amigos are like a stupid move. It's a move where you're like suplexing this guy, and the guy's just standing there, getting up and getting suplexed again and again. It's a retarded move. Eddie Guerrero was not good because of that. Eddie Guerrero, I mean, he's quote unquote good in the ring, but he's not this like incredible like athletic guy, or he's not incredibly strong. He's good because of the character work, because he understands what wrestling is. Wrestling is alive! You know what I'm saying? That's what wrestling is. Wrestling isn't like, oh, what a nice drop toe hold Dean Malenko did. Yeah, Dean Malenko has no personality. That's why he's Dean Malenko, right? Eddie Guerrero has personality, and he continued to evolve his personality. He was not satisfied with being mullet Eddie Guerrero fighting the cruiserweights. He was like, no. I need to advance myself. I can't beat this guy. This guy is boring now. He is indistinguishable from Psychosis and Juventud Guerrera. As a matter of fact, people probably were like, wait, aren't you that Juventud guy? Why is your name spelled with an A now? Or with an O now instead of an A? Right? That's the problem, motherfuckers. That's the problem. He understood, so he went to Latino Heat. You know what I'm saying? He did that, then he teamed with Chavo, became Los Guerreros, and then from that, he started a lie, cheat, and steal thing, which turned into like the one of my favorite Eddie Guerreros, the evil Eddie Guerrero. The one that wanted to take Dominic away from Rey Mysterio, you know what I'm saying? The one that would like come out of his entrance, he had a shirt that said, I am your papi, right? And he had this unforgettable look on his face, like I am here to do horrible things to you, Rey Mysterio. Like, I am here to ruin your life from every vantage point possible. That's why Eddie Guerrero is one of the best wrestlers ever. It's not because of his incredible abilities to do drop toe holds. Nobody gives a fuck about that. Same thing with Booker T. Same thing with, not Benoit, because Benoit didn't have any charisma, but Jericho, all these guys. It's not because Jericho could do a springboard moonsault, right? It's because when they switched companies, they had to invariably shift their character a little bit, right? And the ones that did became great. The ones that didn't did not become great. Like Scott Steiner, for example, didn't shift his character, and he was buried. Booker T shifted his character, and he became a Hall of Famer, right? Same thing. Eddie Guerrero shifted his character, became a Hall of Famer. Benoit didn't shift his character, but it was booked around him so well that he became something. That happens too. Sometimes things get booked around you so well that you become the next Cena without even doing anything. That happens too. But for the most part, having all these different wrestling companies, where if Eric Young can get fired and then go back to TNA and he's like, oh, Eric Young's back, why the fuck would Eric Young go and reinvent a new character? That's why I get excited when these wrestlers get fired, and a lot of them are like, I'm going to create a new character, motherfucks. Like, what's it, Simon Gotch? You know, he's like, I'm going to create a new character. I don't know what happened to him, I don't give a fuck, but you understand what I'm saying, right? I'm going to create a new character. I'm going to be someone new. This didn't work out, so I now must create someone new. This is what works, right? So, for example, if Bubba Ray Dudley was 25 when he was fired, and he went and he created Bully Ray, right? And Vince McMahon hired him, he'd be like, okay, now you're Bully Ray. He would hire him with that new gimmick in mind, because it's a reinvention, you know? Same thing with Drew McIntyre. Like, it's a new Drew McIntyre. New moves, new attitude, new everything, right? He's not anything at all like the Drew McIntyre they fired. They fired a guy who thought he was in a rock band, and they hired a guy who's like a proud Scottish guy who's just jacked and huge and just throwing people around like bitches. You understand what I'm saying? And this is because he reinvented himself. But to incentivize the reinvention of shit, companies need to not bow down to WWE wrestlers and hold them to this high esteem. Because I do not know if ever we will see an AEW main event at a pay-per-view that doesn't involve at least one WWE guy. I don't think it's going to happen, motherfuckers. I don't think it's going to happen in a long time. It might happen when Kenny Omega becomes champion and they have him versus like Brian Cage or something. But other than that, it's going to be him versus Dean Ambrose, him versus Cody, him versus fucking Luke Harper. It's going to be him versus all these WWE motherfucks. So that's what I got to say about that. And with that, motherfucks, you can kiss my ass. What do you think of them apples? Bitches!